At Christmas dinner, my daughter-in-law told me straight to my face, "You don't contribute enough to make suggestions." My son stayed silent. Later, I found out my savings had been drained on gambling. I didn't scream. I didn't crush them. I packed my bags in silence. Weeks later, their mortgage notice arrived in my name. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. There are wounds that time refuses to mend, no matter how many days pass or how many chores one distracts herself with. For Margaret Collins, Maggie to those who knew her best, life after Harold's funeral had turned into a string of silent mornings and hollow evenings. Ohio in early March was cold enough to cloud the breath, but not cold enough to keep her inside. She often found herself kneeling in the yard, trimming away the frostbitten remnants of Harold's beloved chrysanthemums. Each cut of the shears felt like tearing loose another thread of the life they had woven together. That afternoon, as she brushed dirt from her gloves, the phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Too many calls these days were condolences that sounded rehearsed or distant relatives checking boxes of obligation. But the name glowing on the screen pulled at something deeper. Daniel, her only son. "Hey, Mom," his voice came through soft, overly careful. "How are you doing?" It startled her. Weeks had passed without a word, but that was nothing new. Ever since Daniel married Stephanie, his calls had become brief, polite, skimming the surface of connection. She told him she was fine, that she'd been keeping busy, clearing Harold's old closet, working in the garden. Lies, all of it. The closet was untouched since the funeral. The faintest whiff of Harold's jackets was still enough to buckle her knees. But Daniel didn't need that truth. "You've been alone for a while now," he said carefully. "I don't like the thought of you rattling around that big old house." Maggie let out a nervous laugh. "I've managed. It's quiet, but it's home." There was a pause, the kind that warns something rehearsed is about to unfold. "Steph and I were talking. We think maybe you should come live with us for a while. The boys miss you. We've got that spare room. You wouldn't be in the way." Her heart skipped. Live with them? The idea seemed warm at first. Ethan and Noah were her anchors to a future she still longed to be part of. Yet memories from her last visit clouded that warmth. Stephanie barely sparing 2 sentences for her, thumbs glued to her phone, eyes elsewhere. Daniel thinner than she remembered, restless with shadows bruising the skin beneath his eyes. Still, the thought of waking up to her grandson's laughter stirred something inside her chest. Loneliness had grown louder than judgment, and maybe, just maybe, this was the answer. "I'll think about it," she said softly. A week of walking through an empty house made the decision for her. Passing by framed photographs dulled with dust, hearing the echo of her own footsteps in rooms where Harold once laughed. Dinners for one, the television humming as a surrogate companion, the silence pressing down like a weight she could no longer shoulder. One evening she zipped up a suitcase. Not everything, just enough for a long stay. She left the house standing, quiet and patient, like it was waiting for her return. The drive to Daniel's town was short but heavy. She carried cautious hope with her, tucked between folded clothes and neatly wrapped teacups she could not resist bringing. When she arrived, no one came to greet her. Maggie knocked twice before Stephanie opened the door. Her face was expressionless. "You're early," she said, stepping aside. The air smelled of takeout and diapers. Toys scattered across the floor like landmines. A cartoon blared on the television, filling the space with noise. Daniel came down the stairs, baby on his hip, hugging her quickly, too quickly. He gestured toward the guest room. "We cleared it out for you. It's not perfect, but it's something." Maggie stepped inside. Boxes lined the walls. A broken lamp leaned in the corner. An air mattress sagged in place of a bed. No closet space. No room for her things. She smiled anyway, her voice barely above a whisper. "It'll do." That night, lying on the air mattress, she stared at the ceiling, the unfamiliar hum of pipes, the muffled arguments behind closed doors, the creak of floors that did not belong to her, all of it pressed against her chest. She told herself this was temporary. She was needed. This was what family did. Close ranks, lift each other, carry the load together. But beneath that fragile reassurance, something colder stirred. The sense that her presence here had little to do with loneliness, and everything to do with need of another kind. She didn't know it yet, but she had walked into the kind of betrayal that doesn't strike like lightning. It erodes like water against stone, small and quiet, until nothing is left. The morning light slipped weakly through the curtains of the guest room, illuminating the outlines of half-filled boxes and a lamp with a cracked shade leaning crookedly in the corner. Maggie sat on the edge of the air mattress, its plastic seams creaking under her weight, and let the silence of the house seep into her bones. She had expected something warmer, a sign of belonging, perhaps a vase of flowers, or even space cleared for her clothes. Instead, she had walked into a storage room hastily renamed Guest. She dressed slowly, folded her nightclothes with a precision that came more from habit than necessity, and opened the door to the sounds of a house already awake. The cartoon voices from the television echoed down the hall. Ethan and Noah darted past her, sticky fingers clutching half-eaten waffles, while Stephanie trailed behind, coffee in hand, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her phone. "Morning," Maggie offered, her smile hopeful. Stephanie looked up briefly, her expression neutral, and returned her gaze to the device. "Morning," she murmured, before vanishing into the kitchen. Maggie's heart gave a small, reluctant twist. She steadied herself by focusing on the boys, crouching to their level. "You've both grown so much," she whispered, reaching to smooth a strand of hair from Ethan's forehead. He pulled away distractedly, his attention already on the flashing images from the TV. Noah mumbled something unintelligible and scampered off. Their indifference stung, though she told herself it wasn't intentional. Children lived in their own world, and she was simply a visitor in it. Daniel appeared moments later, tie loosened, laptop bag hanging from his shoulder. His hug was rushed, distracted, like an obligation ticked off a list. "We'll talk tonight, Mom," he said, kissing the top of her head without looking her in the eyes. He was gone before she could answer, the slam of the front door leaving a sharp echo behind. That first day unfolded in small fragments of disquiet. Maggie offered to help with dishes, only to be waved away by Stephanie. She tried folding laundry, but Stephanie's polite thanks carried the weight of disapproval, as though Maggie had touched something private. Later, when she asked if the boys wanted to walk to the park, Stephanie said they were too tired, though they spent the afternoon glued to toiles, their faces lit by an artificial glow. By evening, Maggie had prepared a pot of soup, simple but hearty, the kind Harold used to love on cold nights. She ladled it into bowls and set the table, lining the silverware with quiet care. Daniel came home late, his forehead damp with stress. He ate quickly, eyes fixed on his phone. Stephanie picked at her portion without tasting it. No one commented on the meal. It was not cruelty, not outright rejection. It was silence, and silence could cut deeper than words. Days blurred together in a rhythm Maggie hadn't anticipated. She tried to help in every way she knew how, folding the boys' laundry, wiping counters, sweeping crumbs from the floor. She watched the children while Stephanie disappeared upstairs, sometimes for hours. Yet each effort seemed to vanish into air, unacknowledged, sometimes met with a sigh, sometimes with nothing at all. One morning, Stephanie stopped her in the hallway. "Could you not use the washer during the day? The electric bill's been really high." Maggie blinked, surprised. "Of course, I only did one load." "It's fine," Stephanie cut in quickly, walking away before the explanation could finish. Another time, it was the bathroom light left on, then the thermostat, then the water running too long. Small things, trivial things, yet each pointed out with the quiet edge of disapproval. Maggie began to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, even though she had only just arrived. The breaking point of that unease came over dinner a week later. The boys were half asleep at the table, their eyelids heavy from too much screen time. Stephanie's phone glowed in her hand, her thumb scrolling idly. Daniel cleared his throat. His words were casual, but his eyes avoided hers. "Things are a little tight right now, Mom. If you could maybe help out with the mortgage, just until we catch up, I'd really appreciate it." The spoon in Maggie's hand trembled. For a moment, she could not find her voice. Then, as though rehearsed in her bones, she nodded. "Of course. Just tell me what you need." Her voice was steady, but inside something cracked. That night, she sat awake on the air mattress, staring at the shadows crawling across the ceiling. She told herself it was temporary, just a small way to ease their burden. Mothers help their children. That was the natural order of things. But beneath that thought lay another, quieter, more unsettling truth. This was not about her loneliness or even their need for family. It was about money, about what she could provide, about how much she could give before she had nothing left. Maggie closed her eyes, pulled the thin blanket tighter around her, and willed herself to believe she was still wanted here. But the unease would not leave. It clung to her like the chill of early March air, creeping under doors, seeping through cracks, whispering that something was deeply wrong. Sometimes betrayal doesn't crash into your life with slammed doors or shouted arguments. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, disguised as politeness, dressed in casual requests, spoken in tones that almost sound like care. For Maggie Collins, it arrived in the subtle dismissals, the sidelong glances, the way silence carried more weight than words ever could. Days at Daniel and Stephanie's home turned into weeks, and the air mattress groaned under her each night as though echoing her unease. She rose early, made breakfasts, folded tiny socks, tidied rooms scattered with toys, and tried to carve space for herself in a household that felt like a performance staged without her. Yet no matter what she did, gratitude never came. Stephanie's disapproval showed itself in sighs too sharp to ignore, in reminders spoken like corrections to a child. Don't leave the heat on so long. Please turn off the bathroom light. We're trying to cut down on water. Each word clipped, each look carrying that faint irritation of someone tolerating rather than welcoming. Daniel was no better. He buried himself in work, pacing the kitchen on phone calls, retreating into the garage with a beer in hand. When she asked if he was all right, he smiled without warmth. We're just stretched thin, Mom. Bills, kids, work. It's a lot. She nodded, but inside she wanted to shake him, to remind him she had raised him through harder years with far less. She stayed silent, swallowing the truth like medicine no one wanted to take. The children were the only balm. Ethan and Noah sometimes curled into her side while she read them stories, their soft hair brushing her cheek, their laughter bright enough to pierce the fog of the house. But even that comfort was fleeting. Stephanie often pulled them away mid-sentence, sending them upstairs with tablets or into another room with a brisk bedtime. Maggie was left staring at half-finished tales, her voice lingering in air suddenly too still. And then came the money. At first it was a single request, voiced lightly over dinner. If you could maybe help with the mortgage just until we get caught up. Daniel's words stumbled, his fork scraping the plate. Maggie's heart lurched, but she agreed without thinking, dipping into the savings Harold had left behind. She told herself it was a one-time gift, a lifeline tossed out of love. It wasn't. The next month, Daniel asked again, and the month after that, it was no longer a request but an expectation, slipped into conversation as naturally as asking her to pass the salt. Maggie never refused. She convinced herself she was helping, that mothers never stopped giving. Yet deep inside, the line between generosity and exploitation blurred until she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. It was during one of those endless evenings, after she had folded laundry that wasn't hers and scrubbed dishes no one thanked her for, that she felt the full weight of her invisibility. She had cooked a roast that night, the kind Daniel used to beg for as a child. She set the table with folded napkins, lit a candle, tried to recreate the warmth of home within these walls that barely tolerated her. Daniel ate quickly, barely looking up from his laptop. Ethan picked at his food. Noah spilled juice and darted off before finishing. Stephanie came down late, glanced at the plate saved for her, and said flatly, "Next time just ask. I don't really eat red meat." She tossed the untouched meal aside, opened a protein bar, and disappeared upstairs without another word. Maggie sat long after the table emptied, staring at the roast cooling under dim light, the dishwasher humming in the background like mock applause. Her throat tightened. She wasn't a guest, wasn't family, wasn't even a mother here. She was a wallet with legs, a babysitter on call, a maid who cooked meals no one wanted. The quiet betrayal pressed against her chest, slow but suffocating. She thought of Harold's closet, still untouched, still smelling of him. She thought of her own house, sagging and dusty, but hers. She wondered when she had traded belonging for this. She didn't know the breaking point was already on its way, that the cruelest wound would come not from silence, but from words sharpened to a blade. When it arrived, it would split her world in two. And if you've ever given everything only to feel invisible, stay with this story because Maggie's world is about to shift in ways she never imagined. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The casserole dish was still warm when Maggie set it in the center of the table, steam curling into the stale air of the dining room. She had layered it carefully, shredded chicken, cream, noodles, something hearty enough to stretch into tomorrow. The boys sat slouched in their chairs, poking at the food with distracted hands. Daniel balanced his laptop on the table beside his plate, eyes darting between numbers on a screen and the fork in his hand. Stephanie scrolled on her phone, thumbs moving with rhythmic detachment, pausing only to take a bite without looking. Maggie's heart ached at the sight, and dinner had always been sacred in her home. Even when money was thin, even when Harold worked double shifts, she had kept the ritual alive. A table meant togetherness, and togetherness kept a family breathing. Watching this scene unfold now, she felt as though she had stumbled into a play where she no longer knew her lines. "You know," she said gently, folding her napkin on her lap, "if we sat together more often for meals, maybe the boys would eat better." Her voice was soft, meant as an offering, not a criticism. Daniel cleared his throat, not looking up. "We're just a little overwhelmed, Mom." It was then Stephanie raised her head. Her eyes met Maggie's, sharp and flat, as though something had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks, waiting for a chance to spill. She set her fork down with a deliberate clink. "You're always making little comments, Maggie," she said evenly. "Like we don't know how to run our own house." The words landed with the precision of a blade. Maggie blinked, stunned. "I didn't mean it like that. I just—" Stephanie cut her off, her tone colder now. "You do a lot of talking for someone who doesn't actually contribute enough to be making suggestions." The air drained from the room. The boys stilled, watching, sensing the shift. Daniel didn't defend her. His eyes stayed on his plate, his silence louder than any accusation. Maggie's hands trembled under the table. The casserole cooled between them, untouched, as though mocking her effort. She wanted to argue, to remind them she had paid their mortgage, cleaned their floors, cooked their meals, loved their children. She wanted to scream that she had been mother, grandmother, helper, provider, all at once. But the words dissolved in her throat. Because in that moment, the truth unfurled with brutal clarity. She was not family here. She was a placeholder, a convenience dressed up as generosity, a burden disguised as help. Her chair scraped softly against the floor as she stood. She carried her plate to the sink, rinsing it in silence, each motion measured, deliberate. She didn't look back at Daniel or Stephanie. The boys whispered, shifting uncomfortably, but no one stopped her. In the guest room, the air mattress sagged under her as she sat at its edge. She stared at the scuffed floorboards, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Memories flickered across her mind, the nights she had skipped meals so Daniel could eat, the storms she had carried him through alone, the sacrifices she had made without complaint. She remembered the weight of Harold's jacket against her shoulders, the scent of his cologne that still lingered in her closet at home. Now, after all of it, she was not enough. Sleep never came in that night. Instead, she lay awake, her body taut with anger and grief, her heart pulsing with something sharp that refused to dull. When dawn crept through the blinds, she moved with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She zipped her suitcase. Each folded shirt felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Each tucked away item was a quiet declaration. I do not belong here. I do not need this. And then she saw it, propped against the hallway wall just outside the door, her suitcase already packed, her breath caught. They had prepared for this moment long before she admitted it to herself. They had been waiting, anticipating her exit as though it were inevitable. A fissure cracked deep inside her, but beneath the ache, something hardened. She was done. She would not be their housekeeper, their unpaid nanny, their emergency fund. She would not be humiliated in silence. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to lose more than they imagined. Not just her labor, not just her money, but the one person who had carried them without question, who had sacrificed without measure. Maggie wheeled her suitcase down the hall, each step echoing like a final verdict. She didn't say goodbye. She couldn't. Not to the boys, not with their innocent faces and sleepy hands that might have pulled her back into place. She left a note instead, written in neat cursive. Thank you for having me. The sun was just rising when she closed the door behind her. No one noticed. No one stopped her. The silence of that house was its own confirmation. As she drove away, the road blurred through unshed tears, not tears of regret, but of release. She had come seeking family and found only her own erasure. But now, returning to her own home, battered though it was, she knew the truth. Better lonely in a house of memories than invisible in a house of strangers. The cruelest wounds aren't always spoken aloud. Sometimes they hide in numbers on a bank statement, in late-night charges disguised as necessity, in lies dressed up as silence. Maggie Collins discovered hers by accident, and once she did, nothing would ever look the same. The house welcomed her back like a forgotten embrace. Dust floated in streams of sunlight. Harold's old jackets still hung where she had left them, the smell of aged fabric carrying memories that pressed against her chest. She tried to reclaim her space, cleaned every room, folded linens, aired out the curtains. But even as the house breathed again, the silence was heavy. She missed Ethan's laughter, Noah's small hands tugging at her sleeve. The children were innocent, untouched by their parents' coldness. That ache compelled her to send them gifts, a pair of new iPads with sturdy cases, one navy blue, one forest green, each preloaded with games and drawing apps. She slipped in a note written in her looping cursive. Even when I'm far away, I'm always right here. Love, Grandma. The tracking confirmed delivery. Though no thank you ever came. A week later, she saw Stephanie's social media post, the boys grinning ear to ear, holding the iPads. No mention of Maggie, no acknowledgement, but the smiles were enough to keep her going. Then came the night when unease jolted her awake. A pit sat in her stomach, sharp and relentless, urging her toward her desk. She opened her laptop, logged into her bank, and scrolled through recent statements. At first, everything looked normal, but then her eyes caught a line she didn't recognize, a company name vague enough to raise suspicion. She searched it online. The truth stabbed her like ice. A gambling site. Her breath caught. She opened older statements, heart pounding harder with each click. Charge after charge, hundreds of dollars at a time, scattered across weeks, sometimes days apart, all while she was living under their roof, covering their mortgage, folding their laundry. Daniel hadn't just leaned on her. He had lied to her. He had looked her in the eye, claimed bills were drowning them, let Stephanie cut her down at the dinner table, all while funneling her sacrifices into a void he refused to confess. Maggie sat in the dim light of the living room, the glow of the screen painting her face in shades of blue. She did not cry, though tears burned at the edges. She did not scream, though rage swelled like a storm inside her. She only sat there motionless, as something inside her shifted. For the first time in her life, resentment touched her heart toward her own child. Not sharp and explosive, but slow, corrosive, with seeping through ribs, eating away at love that had been weaponized. By morning, she was no longer the same woman. She opened a new savings account, one Daniel could never access, transferred every remaining dollar, closed the old one, canceled the card she had once handed to him just in case, changed the locks on her door. Each action was a ritual, a declaration that the version of herself who excused, who softened, who gave until she vanished, was gone. The phone began ringing within days. At first, Daniel's voice was casual. Hey, Mom, just checking in. Miss the boys. Then it shifted. Hey, did the bank call you? Something weird happened with my account. Soon, messages piled up. We need to talk. Tiffany says you changed your number. Are you okay? Please, just answer. Maggie let them all ring to voicemail. She had listened enough. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the bank, mistakenly addressed to her because she had once co-signed papers Daniel shoved under her nose. The envelope carried a single word that seared her eyes, delinquent, a pre-foreclosure notice. That night, Daniel called again. His message was raw, desperate. I know you're upset, but Mom, we need help. Just this once, please. There was no apology, no mention of the lies, the gambling, the betrayal, was just hunger for rescue. Maggie's fingers hovered over the phone, tempted to answer, tempted to sweep in and fix it like she always had. But the memory of Stephanie's voice cut through. You don't contribute enough to make suggestions. She sat at her table instead and wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, not to Stephanie, but to herself. She listed every bill she had paid, every meal she had cooked, every sacrifice she had made. At the bottom, she wrote a single sentence in thick black ink. And still it wasn't enough. The words stared back like a verdict. For once, she didn't try to rewrite them. Daniel and Stephanie were about to learn what life without her would cost. And Maggie was about to learn, maybe for the first time in her life, what it meant to choose herself. If you've ever been pushed aside after giving your all, stay with this story. Maggie's next choice won't just change her life. It will turn theirs upside down. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The silence between Maggie and her son stretched into weeks, yet it wasn't empty. It carried the faint echoes of unraveling. Cracks spreading through the life Daniel and Stephanie had built, fractures she could see without stepping inside their house. It started subtly, like smoke leaking beneath a closed door. Stephanie's social media posts grew fewer, her perfect smiles vanishing into stiff half expressions. The boys' clothes and photos looked older, their toys scattered in backgrounds that no longer gleamed with a curated polish. The illusion was slipping. Maggie saw the signs everywhere. A sectional sofa listed on a local app. Gently used, must pick up, urgent. She recognized the throw pillows instantly. A week later, brand-name handbags appeared for sale. Stephanie's prized possessions reduced to desperate currency. Soon their shiny SUV disappeared from the driveway, replaced by a dented sedan that seemed borrowed rather than owned. From her own quiet kitchen, Maggie watched the pieces fall. She didn't gloat, she didn't cheer, but she didn't intervene either. She had carried them long enough. Now it was their turn to stumble under the weight of their own choices. Still, her love for Ethan and Noah refused to dim. She sent packages when the ache of missing them grew unbearable. Warm jackets, storybooks, scarves she stitched herself late into the night. Each box carried a note, simple and true. A grandma's love doesn't need permission. It's always yours. She mailed them without return addresses, without expectation. One parcel went further. Inside were coats, books, and toys for the boys, but also a card addressed to Daniel and Stephanie. On the front, a watercolor tree losing its leaves. Inside, written in Maggie's steady hand, love isn't alone, respect isn't optional, help isn't forever. Days passed without reply, then a box appeared on her porch, no return label. Inside were the photo frames she had sent earlier of herself with the boys, returned carefully wrapped. The gifts for the children piffed him. On the back of her card, Daniel's handwriting added a single line. We understand. We'll figure it out. Maggie held the note for a long time, her heart thudding. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. A small crack in the wall of denial. Life in her own home shifted quietly around her. She pulled out her old sewing machine, oiling the joints, stitching fabric until the hum of the needle drowned out her restless thoughts. She sold handmade aprons and blankets online, her work finding strangers who valued her craft, who paid gladly, who sent thanks without strings attached. For the first time in years, she felt seen. But beyond her walls, the collapse deepened. She ran into Daniel at the grocery store one afternoon. He didn't notice her, or maybe he pretended not to. His cart held generic cereal, baby wipes, and frozen pizza, bare necessities, stripped of indulgence. His shoulders slumped under invisible weight. He looked older, thinner, the light in his eyes dulled. Maggie watched from behind a display of canned soup, torn between instinct and resolve. A part of her longed to step forward, to hug him, to ask how the boys were. But Stephanie's words echoed in her memory. You don't contribute enough to make suggestions. The sting of that moment anchored her feet. She let him pass. That night, she cooked herself a real meal. Roast chicken with rosemary, roasted vegetables, a glass of red wine poured into one of Harold's favorite goblets. She set the table for one, lit a candle, and ate slowly. Each bite tasted of freedom, of choosing herself. Christmas came quietly. She decorated her own small tree, hung Harold's ornament near the top, and baked cinnamon bread from her mother's recipe. The scent filled the house with warmth, but beneath it lingered the shadow of absence. She missed the boys, their laughter, their hands tugging at her, their questions spilling faster than she could answer. That ache never dulled. On Christmas Eve, a knock startled her. No car in the driveway, just a large box on her porch wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside were two smaller packages, one addressed to Grandma, the other to Mimi, Noah's special nickname for her. Her hands shook as she unwrapped them. The iPads she had sent weeks ago were returned, decorated with stickers and glitter. On one, written in a child's careful scrawl, "We miss you. Merry Christmas. Come back soon." Maggie sank to the floor, tears spilling freely for the first time in months. Not for Daniel, not for Stephanie, but for the children caught in a storm they couldn't name. She wanted to run to them, to hold them, to tell them none of it was their fault. Instead, she packed another box. Jackets, gloves, small toys, and a note. "A grandma's love is always yours, no matter what." She dropped it at the post office without a return label, setting her boundary with steady hands. She would not disappear, but she would not be their foundation anymore. The collapse was theirs to endure. The rebuilding, if it ever came, would be theirs to choose. What do you do when your own child appears at your door, not with pride, but with ruin written across his face? That was the moment Maggie Collins had dreaded and expected all at once, and when it came, it carried the weight of every sacrifice she had ever made. The call came on a Tuesday evening. She almost didn't answer, but something in her chest whispered to pick it up. Daniel's voice cracked through the line, thinner than she remembered. "Mom, please, I need to see you." He arrived the next afternoon in a compact sedan that looked borrowed. His shoulders sagged as he climbed the steps, his frame thinner, his eyes sunken. When Maggie opened the door, she barely recognized him. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice low, stripped of its usual bravado. She stepped aside. He sat at the edge of the couch like a man afraid of breaking it, his hands wringing together until his knuckles whitened. The silence stretched until it trembled. Then his voice cracked open. "I messed up," he whispered. "I don't need you to say it. I already know." Maggie sat opposite, her gaze steady. She didn't rush him. She let him carry the weight of his own confession. "I think I'm addicted to online betting," he continued, words tumbling like stones. "I tried to stop, I swear, but every time I felt overwhelmed, I picked up my phone and Steph, she doesn't understand. She just wants the money back. That's all she ever talks about. I ruined everything. The house is behind on payments. Some nights the kids ask why there's no heat. Steph's talking about leaving. I don't know what to do." His voice broke into a sob, and then came the question Maggie had known would come, the one she feared more than any other. "Can you help us? Just this once, I'll pay you back, I promise." Her breath caught. For a fleeting moment, she saw not the man before her, but the boy she once rocked through fevers, the child who clung to her hand on the first day of school, the teenager who cried when Harold missed his graduation. Her son, her only son. But love had taught her hard lessons. She rose from the couch, walked to the door, and opened it. Her voice was calm, steady, but firm as stone. "Not today." Daniel's eyes widened. "Mom." "I'm not saying never," she interrupted softly, "but not today. Not until you understand what it cost me to sit alone in this house while you let someone else humiliate me in yours." He swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling like a man learning to breathe again. He tried to speak, but she raised her hand. "I loved you through every stage of your life," she said. "I gave without asking. I sacrificed until I disappeared, and you let it happen. So now, Daniel, you will have to sit in the silence you created." Tears slipped down his cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For the first time, she believed him, but belief didn't erase the damage. He left 10 minutes later, shoulders heavy, steps slow, closing the door without a sound. Maggie locked it behind him, her hand trembling. Then she collapsed into Harold's old chair, tears spilling. Not for Daniel, but for the woman she used to be. The mother who thought love meant endless forgiveness. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who knew the value of boundaries, someone unwilling to be erased again. The silence that followed was not empty. It was space. Space for Daniel to sit with his choices. Space for Maggie to reclaim herself. If you've ever had to draw a line against the very people you love most, you know the strength it takes. And Maggie's story isn't done. Stay with it, because what comes next will show how boundaries can build, not just break. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the final chapters. The weeks that followed Daniel's visit carried a strange kind of silence. Not the heavy, punishing silence Maggie had endured before, but one filled with possibility, like the pause before a storm decides whether it will break or pass. She could feel change pressing at the edges, waiting to take shape. For the first time in years, Daniel began showing signs of responsibility. He called to say he had sold the SUV, the one Stephanie had once refused to let anyone else touch. He canceled credit cards, admitted he had joined Gamblers Anonymous, and picked up a night job delivering packages. His voice was steadier each time, less frantic, though exhaustion still lingered. He sounded like a man trying to build something on soil that had been scorched. Maggie listened, withholding both praise and judgment. She had learned that words could be stolen, twisted, turned into excuses. Action was what mattered now. When he visited a week later, he looked worn but different. His cheeks were still hollow, his beard unkempt. But in his eyes, there was something raw, honesty she hadn't seen in years. He sat on her couch, not like a stranger this time, but like a man asking for ground beneath his feet. "I'm trying, Mom," he said, voice breaking in places. "But I'm scared. We're 2 months behind on the mortgage. Steph's angry all the time. The boys hear everything. I don't want to lose them." He lowered his eyes. "I need help. But this time it's not just money. I need structure. I need you to teach me how to stop depending on everyone else." Maggie inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This was the moment she had feared and prayed for in equal measure. She stood, walked into the kitchen, and returned with a folder. Inside were neatly printed documents, a payment agreement, a budget plan, a list of rehab clinics, and a checklist for separating finances. She placed it in his hands. Daniel opened it slowly, his eyes widening as he skimmed the pages. "What is this?" "My terms," Maggie said firmly. She sat across from him, her voice calm, deliberate. "I'll pay the past due amount on the mortgage, just enough to keep the house from being taken. One time. From here on, you are in control of your money. I'll help guide you only if you show up. But if you miss a therapy session, skip a meeting, or I see a single charge from a betting site, I'm out." Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I won't," he whispered. Maggie didn't soften. "And one more thing. You separate your finances from Stephanie completely. No joint accounts, no shared cards. She manages hers, you manage yours. If you stay tangled in her chaos, I'm done." His eyes flickered, fear and hesitation clouding them. "That's not going to go over well," he muttered. "That's your decision," she replied, "but it's the only way forward." For a long moment, he stared at the folder, his hands trembling. Then he nodded, shoulders sinking under the weight of it. "Okay." The word was small, but it carried more power than she expected. Something shifted in him, not forgiveness, not redemption, but accountability. They shook hands across the table, the gesture awkward but binding. He signed the papers, his signature shaky but resolute. They set weekly check-ins, her rules, her timing. For the first time, the power tilted, not in control, but in balance. At the door, he turned back, eyes damp but clearer than before. "I never realized how much I leaned on you until you stepped away," he said quietly. Maggie's lips curved in a faint smile. "That's the thing about leaning. It works until the person holding you up steps aside." He left in silence, driving away into a night that no longer belonged only to his mistakes, but to his choices. Maggie stood by the window long after his car disappeared, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. For the first time in years, she felt as though she had won, not by rescuing him, not by drowning in sacrifice, but by standing her ground. It wasn't over. The storm hadn't passed, but something in the air felt different, lighter, as if both mother and son had taken their first steps on separate paths that could still one day meet again. The weeks after Daniel signed Maggie's terms were quieter than she expected. Not peaceful, not yet, but steadier, like the earth settling after a quake. Each call from him was measured, free from the frantic edge that had once clung to every word. He told her about meetings, about sticking to the budget, about deliveries that kept him out late, but gave him a sense of purpose. His voice carried something new. Fear still, yes, but also a flicker of pride. Maggie listened, her heart both guarded and tender. She didn't rush to encourage him, didn't rush to doubt him. She let his actions prove what words never had. She noticed changes even from a distance. Stephanie's presence dimmed. Once a constant curator of perfection, her posts grew sparse, her smile thinner, her tone sharper. The cracks in their marriage showed in ways neither could hide, yet Daniel didn't use her as an excuse. When he told Stephanie he was separating their finances, his words weren't loud or dramatic, just quiet, tired truth. I have to do this myself, for me, for the kids. For the first time, Maggie believed him. When he came to her door weeks later, his posture was different. His beard was trimmed, his clothes cleaner, his weight steadier. He sat on her couch, not as a man begging for rescue, but as a son who had chosen to show up. I started going to meetings twice a week, he said. Sold the last of what we didn't need, picked up extra shifts. It's not much, but I'm keeping up. He paused, his hands tightening around each other. I want to move out, Mom. Get a small place of my own. It's time. Maggie felt her chest tighten, fear and pride colliding inside her. Are you sure? Yeah, he said with quiet certainty. I can't keep living like a guest in my own life. The boys need me to stand on my own. It's going to be hard, but I can do it. Her throat burned, but her voice was steady. Then do it. You can. Days later, she saw him standing in front of a modest duplex, keys in his hand. He looked younger somehow, though his eyes carried the gravity of someone who had walked through fire. I paid for this with my own money, he told her. I'll cover the bills. I'll be a father, a husband, and a son. No more excuses. Maggie's heart swelled. I'm proud of you, she whispered, her voice trembling with both relief and sorrow. He looked at her with eyes wet but clear. I couldn't have done it without you, but it's not because you saved me. It's because you stopped. You gave me the space to find myself again. She hugged him then, not as a rescuer clinging to the broken pieces, but as a mother embracing the man he was finally becoming. As she watched him drive away, his car shrinking against the horizon, Maggie felt something she hadn't in years. Freedom, not just hers, but his. The cycle was broken, the burden lifted. She no longer carried him. He had learned to carry himself. For Maggie, peace didn't come with grand gestures or perfect endings. It came with the sound of her sewing machine humming late at night, the flicker of candles near Harold's photo, the taste of dinner she cooked for herself alone, and the knowledge that love, real love, sometimes meant stepping back instead of holding on. Maggie's journey was never about losing her family. It was about reclaiming herself. She had given, sacrificed, and nearly erased her own worth, only to discover that love without respect is a hollow bargain. By drawing boundaries, she didn't just save herself. She gave Daniel the chance to face his reflection and rise. Sometimes the bravest act a parent can make is to stop carrying, to let their child learn the strength of their own legs. If Maggie's story touched you, share it. Subscribe for more, and remember, your voice, your boundaries, and your story matter.